Hey everyone, thanks for joining me on the reading of my work in progress novel called The Feral Hour of the Wolf. And this is part 3. And last we connected, you got to know Maggie a little bit more. She works in a pub in Belfast, Ireland called Magoo. And she's young and she's beautiful and she's a big flirt, which, come on. That's how a lot of bartenders make their money, right? And she's used to having guys fall all over her. Until Tall, Dark, and Delicious walks in. He's young, he's hot, he's not from Ireland, and he's really not paying much attention to Maggie. Now, a little inside information. The character, the one of the guy who's walked into the pub, who Maggie's got an eye on now, he's actually based on a real person. Somebody that I knew when I bartended. Like, it's him. Everything I wrote about this guy. This is based on a character, not a character, a real person. I'll tell you his name. His name is David. I won't give you his last name. And this scene right here, it happened in real life. All right, let's find out what's going to go. Putting her head back in the game, Maggie began slinging drinks to the awaiting crowd. A sexy goth girl with a French accent and her punk rocker sidekick, his arm draped around her neck and suckling on her cheek, ordered matching Sex on the Beach drinks. How appropriate. And as disgustingly endearing as it might be, Maggie's cynical side wanted to warn Mademoiselle that more than likely that tonight would be a wham bam thank you ma'am. Thinking that true love could be found in Magoo was almost laughable. But in the privacy of her own thoughts, Maggie longed for it. Leaning up against the ice bin, Maggie felt something crunch in her skirt pocket. This is why I read this stuff. Forgetting that she hadn't emptied the past hour's tips into her tip jar, she motioned to the next antsy customer that she would be right back, and scurried to the cash register area where everyone stashed their nightly gratuities. She reached in and began dumping dollar bills into a glass pickle jar marked Mags. Most were loose bills that she quickly shoved into their temporary resting place. And just as she pivoted to get back to the impatient party animals, she jammed her hand back into her pocket, only to find a rolled-up wad of $20 bills. Holding it in the palm of her hand, Maggie then remembered that it was the tip that wet dog guy had given her. He had shoved it into her hand so quickly that she never even looked. For reasons she couldn't explain, Maggie's hands began to tremble as she unfolded the bills and found a small yellow lined piece of paper embraced in the middle. And as she smoothed out each crease until the small square was completely opened, there were only 2 scribbled words on it. I'm George. That was it. Nothing more. But it made her smile. Now she knew that he wanted her to know, as in to know him. She continued to pour drinks from behind the bar, and at the same time did her best to keep an eye on her potentially new admirer. He had disappeared into the darkened part of the club, and Maggie tried to focus past the steady blinking of the strobe light. While those inexperienced in the dance club scene would become dizzy or even nauseous, the non-stop pulsating lights were a small distraction for someone with Maggie's chops. In between the thrusts and beams from when the dance floor bulbs changed from blue to yellow, she finally caught a quick glimpse of her stormy suitor. There, leaning up against the wall, and in the halo of the fake disco light full moon, in his black leather vest stood a scene from a James Dean flick. George was that cool. And if she wasn't mistaken, he was staring directly at her. It made her excitingly uncomfortable. She watched him light up a cigarette, bring it up to his lips, hold it between his thumb and index finger, and then take a long drag. It was surprisingly sexy. And when the cloud of smoke whispered away from his face, Maggie saw No, actually, she felt his eyes penetrating hers. She tilted her head down ever so slightly and tried to ignore it by concentrating on the drink she was mixing. But in between the clinking of tossed ice into the glass and the popping of beer bottles in the opener, she could not pull away from his fixated stare. Every few seconds, she found herself stealing a quick glimpse of George leaning up against a wooden pillar covered in old band stickers. Wait, was he smiling at her? A smirk, maybe? Hey there, my love. You heard me, yes? I need a vodka tonic. Startled back into the reality of her work, Maggie's head snapped back up to the man standing at the bar. She nodded in agreement with an almost apologetic grin. She was off her game now. George was getting to her without having to say a single word. But it felt good in an uncontrollable kind of way. She looked past her parched customer and focused on George off in the distance and pretended like she didn't notice how, with each sip of his Guinness, he continued to gaze in her direction. The draw to him was intoxicating, but she didn't want him to see that she too was just as interested. In her line of work, you had to play hard to get what you wanted. With being a bartender, normally Maggie did not take drink orders from the floor. That was the job of the cocktail waitress. Although at one time she had been one, with now a year on the job, she had worked her way up to the elite position on the throne behind the bar. But tonight, she was willing to step down from her place of royalty and under the guise of her subordinates, pick up a drink tray, and then make her way into the peasantry of Magoo. Maggie caught Heather, one of the regular servers near the dance floor. Heather, give me your tray. I'll deliver these, she said. Heather hesitated but handed over the orders. Maggie was known for being curt, and with bartenders holding unspoken seniority, Heather knew better than to ask questions. A Madonna ballad began to play, lowering the volume enough for the girls to talk instead of shouting over the music. Just tell me which tables these go to, and I'll take care of it, Maggie said, using Heather as a shield while she peeked around to check if George was still there. She was startled when she accidentally made direct eye contact with him. His intense, mysterious stare hadn't wavered. Oh my God, I'm getting excited. After delivering just 2 drinks and brushing off other customers trying to place orders, Maggie finally spotted him, George, sitting alone. For a moment, she couldn't believe he didn't have some lush of a woman draped over his arm. Guys who looked like that almost never came into Magoo alone. Despite never having had a steady boyfriend herself, Maggie couldn't help but think that this one was starting to seem like keeper material. So, as I said, this scene in my novel was what happened to me many, many years ago when I was bartending at some crappy little bar in the San Fernando Valley, California. And it was a rough place. And one night, this customer came in. He was a regular, and I was new. And the current bartender was explaining to me who David was. She said he's not very friendly. Like, he won't talk to you. He's polite, but he won't talk to you. But we found a common connection, and he ended up being my boyfriend eventually. I wonder where David is now. Well, I guess we'll have to wait to the rest of my story and Maggie's story until next time we meet.